Kia ora and welcome back to Whakarongo, the podcast representing the voices of thousands of rangatahi in state care. My name is Sydney Ann, and after marching to Parliament last year calling on the government to uphold 6 promises relating to our basic rights, this year we're talking to the young people affected by those promises being broken. The third is a promise made to Lisa Mclaren.
You promised to support me with healthcare.
Lisa had a lot of trouble accessing proper healthcare, with an inconsistent and often fractured approach leaving her to grapple with issues surrounding dental care and mental health. Kia ora, Lisa. Firstly, thank you so much for sharing your story with us. I wanted to start off by asking about what your experience was like in care.
I was a bit different to other care experience young people in the fact that my twin brother and I were not uplifted. My mum was pregnant, and when she realised she had twins, she was like, hey, that's not chill, it's pretty hard, mahi. And at the beginning, initially the agreement between herself and Child, Youth and Family was that my foster parents would come visit her about 3 times a day to make sure that we were fed and bathed and settled.
Right. With you staying with your biological mum?
Yes. Okay. Yes. Because my foster parents, they lived down the road from my biological mum, so the initial agreement was that they'd come in and check. When we were first born and we were in the NICU, she put her hand up for help. She previously had children uplifted, and this time she put her hand up and said, I really need some help. So the agreement changed from just part-time visitation from carers to my twin brother and I going into their permanent care.
Oh, that's so awesome that your biological mum was able to kind of say, I actually need help, because a lot of the time people look at care as a really negative thing, but when it works, it is supposed to help people in your mum's situation. So being that you were in care from birth, do you remember what your experiences with healthcare were like as a child growing up in care?
I think one of the things that is quite interesting is that the way we were registered with general practitioners is that they used their surname instead of my birth surname. So that actually caused quite a lot of admin tension. Getting into an ambulance and they ask you what your name is. I say my birth name. They say we only have records of your birth. I say my foster family's last name, and then there's the rest of it. Let's merge these 2 records. Oftentimes they're not merged.
So there's a gap in your records because of the name confusion.
My general practitioner, I actually double-checked with her recently. I said, how far back do my records go? And there's nothing before the age of 7.
So, before 7, is you went to the doctor and there's just no record?
Yeah, there's no record. I do remember going to the doctor very often. Yeah. There was never an issue with accessing.
Well, I'm assuming that you would have got your immunisations as a baby and all that kind of stuff. It's crazy because we all have an NHI number. Does that mean you had 2?
I did. I had 2 NHI numbers.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
So that complicates it a bit more. Because I was going to say, I personally have had 3 last names, but they're all linked under my same NHI number, so it doesn't matter as long as I can tell my GP that. But to have 2 NHI numbers, you're 2 people, but you're 1 person.
Yeah.
Oh my God. Okay. So how did that then impact your health, your mental health, your physical health when you're growing up as a young person?
I think the fact that when I would go to access primary health services and there was just no consistent name, which name do I say, and what records do they have, and it was never consistent between hospitals, ambulance practices. It would either be one name or the other. There would never be, or some of the records would be all under my foster family's last name and none under Mclaren. Or they'd all be under Mclaren because it's my birth name, and none would be under Paul.
Oh my goodness. Have you been able to consolidate them now?
Yes. As soon as I turned 18 and got a community services card, I had to change my name to match that as a GP, and that was the only time they got merged.
Oh my goodness. So did Oranga Tamariki, or it would have been SIFs back then for you, did they have any, like, was there any support from them in terms of like making sure that you had the right information?
Absolutely not.
Oh, okay.
Absolutely not.
If there was a gap then in your medical records, did you find that that meant that you sometimes didn't get the right healthcare that you needed?
There was definitely a few times where my migraines weren't noted down, so I would have other GPs and doctors offering me, say, like birth control that would cause significantly bad side effects with the migraines and things like that, or just not knowing the like history of tonsillitis so many times.
So something that you spoke about before was your mum knew that she was having a mental health crisis or long-term was mentally unwell, and so kind of advocated for herself to, and you guys as babies, to not be in her full-time care. But so Oranga Tamariki or SIFs were aware that your mum had identified that as an issue for her. Did that mean that there was any proactive support in place for you and your brother in case you also had some mental health challenges, knowing that a lot of mental health is genetic or can be passed down?
Absolutely not. As a child, I was acutely aware of my mum's conditions. Like, I could have told you about schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, borderline personality disorder when I was about 8. Probably could have told you what she had. But in terms of that, SIF's actions were more to try avoid her mental health having an impact on us by her behaviour or the way that she, presented herself. They didn't want that to affect us in a negative way when she was visiting. But there was never a proactive sense of both of these children's biological parents are severely incapacitated, so we should keep an eye on these children. There was never that.
Yeah, because like I understand SIFs like wanting to protect you from it if your mum is having a rough time because you don't want to be traumatized as a kid. However, I'm surprised to hear that or I'm not surprised. I'm just I'm more disappointed to hear, were your foster parents given support or guidance on what to look out for?
Oh, no. One of the things that glaringly stares out to me when you say that is I remember my late foster mum saying to me sometimes after we'd go to see my birth mum, she would look at me and go, I really hope that you don't turn out like that. Not in a mean way, just in a I really hope you don't have those struggles. But there was never any information provided or resources given to sort of be hey, if this behaviour or anxiety or any of these things start rearing their head, that's a sign that we need to go into proactive action. There was never that.
Especially as a teenager, right? Because I'm not super knowledgeable about a lot of mental health issues, but I do know schizophrenia, for example, is super severe but presents as a young adult, late teen, early young adult life. Yeah, and so I feel for your foster parents and for yourself, there should have been some sort of, hey, look out for these sorts of things for these young people, because not saying they will, but you could, because you do have a more increased chance. So just nothing.
Honestly, my foster parents were just living in fear that we would have a mental breakdown, but they didn't know anything in regards to what that might look like. And I remember being a very highly strung child, very anxious, very shy, very just terrified of the world. And when I think back to those times, that was a clinical level of anxiety for an 8-year-old or 7-year-old to have.
So you already had symptoms?
Absolutely, absolutely. And I knew deep down what was happening. But because there was that sense of fear that was created, mostly I will say from Child, Youth and Family, that fear created this sort of tunnel vision of I hope it's not going to happen to them. I hope it's not going to happen to them.
Yeah.
So I don't feel at that time I could have said, I'm very anxious.
I feel like education around the realities of it and then support would be more beneficial, especially if you say you're a kind of high functioning child. I feel like you maybe could have handled a little bit of acknowledgement of what your mum was going through and explanation about, it's not a bad thing, but, this is what's happening. But what do you think the gaps are for kids who are in care who are trying to access health?
I think that it's just so important to actually know what the biological parents' health status is, even if they're not fully active, because in an ideal world, my foster parents would think, they've created the environment where those mental illnesses aren't going to rear their head. But in reality, for both myself and my twin brother, it was pretty much 100% chance that we would inherit something.
Yeah.
Given the array of mental illnesses, like a smorgasbord between my biological parents.
Oh God, take your pick.
Yeah, so
It's just reminded me of when we went to when we marched to Parliament last year. When we all made signs, and I remember seeing one sign that said, I should have access to my family's medical history. Do you know if you ever had let's say your GP, if they ever had access to your birth parents' medical files, or was it just we kind of know that this is what she's...
It was word of mouth. It was word
okay.
of mouth. And I'd say even coming into my teenage years and adulthood, when I finally felt able to say this is what's going on with me, it was just sort of I had to tell my GP what I knew of my mother's medical history, and she just had to believe me.
Yeah.
Which she did. She's a great GP, but she just had to take my word for it, because there's nothing.
Which is wild to me, because not just the mental health stuff, but let's say there's actually a genetic condition that runs in your family and you just don't know.
Which there is.
Oh, well, that puts you at risk, right? Of your caregivers not knowing, you not knowing, your GP essentially not knowing. How do you treat that if that's unknown? And I know there's a lot of young people out there who don't know what their medical history is. I've had to say that to my GP before when, you go to surgery and it's do you have a family history of this, this, and this? And it's
no idea.
I don't know. I can guess.
No, it's actually come to pass as well, is that I've been diagnosed with things that have genetic components, and then that's gone back to, say, my birth mother, and then they'll diagnose her with the same thing because they suddenly see this genetic link and they know that I have this.
Oh, wow. So you're helping diagnose your mom?
Yes.
Did you want to talk a little bit about your experience with dental health? Because I know that you've had significant issues. Let's put it that way.
So I had astronomically bad teeth, and that they came through thick and fast. By the time I was 8, I was seeing an orthodontist.
Oh wow, full of teeth.
Yep. But I was so little. I'm still,
she's 3'4".
I'm 5'2". SIPs were aware that I was seeing an orthodontist, and they were paying for the x-rays and things like that. You know how some lucky children get their braces when
I know, I've seen them about.
They're 10 or 11, and they get that awkward part of their life over with. I got braces when I was 14.
Amazing.
That's how long it took for me to.
So from 8 to 14?
No, I didn't have.
No. I mean, it took them.
It took them that long. Yeah.
Okay.
For my mouth to be fully
able for braces.
Able for braces. I couldn't have a plate or anything. But when it came to getting those braces, the first thing that Oranga Tamariki offered was that they were going to pay the down payment, which was $12.50, and that my foster parents would be responsible for all of the rest of the payments that came with it. And obviously they didn't agree with that. My orthodontist didn't agree with that. And you think that's pretty bad, right?
Yeah.
It gets worse.
Oh no.
Child, Youth and Family approached my biological mother, who is on the supported living payment. They wanted her to pay the entire balance, $7,500.
Oh, it's hey, we know that you actually couldn't look after your children, but how about their teeth? That's why they wanted her to pay thousands of dollars.
Yes. And like when you think about a supported living payment, and we go back to like 2014.
Yeah.
That would have been literally over half of her yearly income.
Well, like even now, people who are on the benefit is already not a living wage, like to be on a benefit. So like what ended up happening?
Yep. That went back to my orthodontist. They were like, we're asking Lisa's biological mum to pay. And he was like, excuse me. And he actually sent SIFs all of my photographs, all of them, because he really wanted to drive home how like urgently I needed this treatment, like otherwise I wouldn't be able to eat or speak properly. Had one tooth just hanging out like Nanny McPhee.
Not the Nanny
the Nanny McPhee tooth. And he sent the photos to SIFs with a very angry letter. And that was what it took for them to write an exemption request.
I just want to give that orthodontist a shout out, because like that shouldn't have to happen. Like it should just have not happened. But shout out to those medical professionals who are advocating for our kids in care, because like that is above and beyond the fact that he like sent that. And you have beautiful teeth. You've had the medical healthcare that you needed. But for those who are listening and not seeing, she's got great teeth. But that's like, I just can't wrap my head around the fact that first off, they want your foster parents to pay, which it makes me think like, I hope that there's not other young people, I dread to think there actually are, who are out there needing medical treatment, and OT, CIS, whoever it was that they're dealing with is saying to them that they have to pay, because that's not, as far as I'm aware, that's not their financial responsibility. And then second, that they would go to your birth mum and be like, hey, you did the right thing by asking us to take your children because you knew that you wouldn't be able to provide for them. However, now we're going to ask for you to provide for them.
I found that quite traumatizing, because then I was, getting phone calls from my biological mum, and she was heartbroken that she couldn't front up that money. And I was, 14 years old going, well, why are they asking you?
Yeah. Well, that would have been tough for her. Hey,
it was awful. She felt, she already had those feelings of I'm not a good parent, and I'm constantly like, no, you're the best parent.
Well, she made the best choice. She did.
She was doing great advocacy.
Yeah.
And then to hear your own mum just, crying because SIFs have asked for $7,500 out of thin air, and she's feeling like I'm not providing for my children.
You're not a unique story in the nicest way possible. I'm like, you're not unique. Like, I don't mean it like that. I mean that there are literally hundreds, if not thousands, of young people who are facing this or have faced this or issues similar to this, and it just makes me so mad. So recently the report came out by Aotearoa tamariki that if you've been in care, you're 4 times more likely to attempt suicide than young people who have not been in care. So why do you think we are so much more at risk than our peers who are not in care?
I think that even if you're living in like an ideal placement with foster parents that take you to the doctor and are very positive and open, there is still, when your care experience, you feel like a burden. So there's like the burden of saying like, hey, thank you for like bringing me into your life and, parenting me when you absolutely had no obligation to. Thank you for that.
Just describing my whole
I'm depressed and anxious, especially with, as I mentioned earlier, like my foster parents just being so scared of what mental illnesses could come in the future. I did not mention anything about my mental health to my GP until I was 18.
Yeah, because you don't want to be a burden, hey?
No.
Yeah, if you could say something to the current or any future Minister for Children, what would you say in regards to healthcare for kids who are under oranga tamariki care?
I'm going to look right down the camera. So then, okay, I'm going to tell you this. You link the location of the child with the closest GP there is. And if you look at an address and it says Aotearoa, but their GP is in Pōneke, now I don't know how to explain this, but that might mean that the child is not currently accessing primary health care. And if we are, when you think about the fact that Oranga Tamariki doesn't have good comprehensive records of which children are enrolled in doctors and dentists, and if they are enrolled, not even knowing if they've shifted placement and have updated that is out the gate. Like I said, state parents, good parents, make sure their children are enrolled in the doctor. So state parents, Oranga Tamariki, should be doing the same. If not better, I would argue. I would say absolutely better. This should be every check-in with a social worker. Have you seen a doctor recently?
Yeah.
It's a very easy question to ask. Have you seen a doctor?
How different do you think your life would have been like had all of those things that we've talked about not happened? If they'd been done in the way that they should have been, how different would your life have been?
I think that I wouldn't have waited until I was an adult to come clean about being mentally ill. I think I would have been medicated a lot earlier, probably in high school, just knowing how I was actually coping in high school. I don't think I would have waited till age 22 to go on mood stabilizers. There was also just this inherent shame of being mentally ill. And because my foster family, not mentally ill, it was just not something that I could say and say, if I were to say, hey, I am so anxious and depressed and suicidal, I didn't want to come across as ungrateful for being in that placement. Like how rude of me to be taken in by this lovely family and I'm suicidal. You know, you feel like the worst person on the planet. I think if SIFs or Oranga Tamariki had kept in mind that both of my parents biologically were, like I said, smorgasbord of mental illnesses, there should have been like metrics being used to tick against as young as possible, really. If there, if there was a tick box and I was marked against it, even as like an 8-year-old, they would have realised that I was feeling deeply troubled and anxious, and it wouldn't have had to be a huge revelation for me to step forward and tell people that I was feeling mentally in crisis.
Dr. Nina Sue has been a doctor for around 6 years and is continuing her training with a focus on paediatrics and paediatric emergencies. She says there are a lot of shortfalls when it comes to delivering healthcare to rangatahi and care, and wants to form part of a new generation of doctors aiming to make a difference.
I think the training program has changed, and sometimes it doesn't feel like it's happening fast enough. When I went through training, so I started in 2012, there was a lot of more focus on communication skills, empathy, the social determinants of health, in terms of, health is much more than just a list of symptoms and some blood test results. It's about who the whole person is. We were taught about the idea of the haora Māori approach of, health is your physical health, but it's also your mental health. It's your spiritual health. It's how you fit in your community and how you are connected to the whenua. So all of these are like relatively new learnings for medical students. So, my senior doctors never went through that program, right?
Yeah.
But this sort of generational change, it takes time. It takes time for those medical students to finish medical training.
To even become a doctor.
To become a doctor, and then go through the training program and then keep that wānanga and keep that kaupapa going for the next generation of doctors. So it's really hard. Listening to Lisa's story, it's really difficult to feel like she's been, let down, but also really empowering to see that there were individuals in her story who advocated for her. And I think that there will be more of those people in the community working in various roles in health who keep fighting and advocating for their patients. And I can only hope that there will be more and more and more as this new generation filter out.
Yeah, that's so true. During your training, like how much of your training, if any, is like specific to learning the intricacies of treating a patient who is in care or has care experience?
I would say that the short answer is that there really isn't any, okay? But the long answer is that, there are lots of groups of people who are disadvantaged for multiple different reasons in this system that we have, that we don't have any attention on as well. So, we don't really get much education on, say, people with drug addictions, people who are refugees, people from, the African continent, or even, so myself, I'm Chinese, there's very little education on Asian health, and to even group all Asian people into one group, that's a whole nother thing. So I think on the one hand, if we really wanted to learn more about children in care, I honestly, I don't know that having a 1 hour lecture by some academic telling us about the stats of, children in care experience things like this and this and this. I would worry that 1 hour lecture wouldn't actually give us the full story, because it's coming from an academic, right? And I would worry that would sort of flatten the experience of what it's like to be care experienced. And, I'm not care experienced myself, but I would say that actually talking to you guys, being invited on this podcast and listening to your stories, I think that's so much more powerful than what a medical student could experience, and for us to ask someone who is care experienced to come and stand on that stage and speak to 300, doctors. I think that's a hugely intimidating thing to do at the best of times. And, from cognitive science, what we see is that the best way to learn something is when you have an emotional attachment to the situation, and from an emergency doctor point of view, when you're emotionally there because you're in this really high stakes environment, you just don't forget that kind of stuff. In the same way that when somebody shares their story with so much vulnerability and openness, and they bring the listener on that journey with them, that's the kind of stuff that you don't forget, And so hearing the story direct from the horse's mouth in terms of what you guys are doing with your VOYCE podcast, that is probably the most powerful thing we can do for our healthcare workers.
Yeah, I guess actually it's a really good, interesting perspective, because for me growing up, or maybe when I just had left care, I would be frustrated why doctors didn't know, why did I always have to explain myself to my doctor. Hearing your perspective, I'm actually, it takes you so long to become a doctor, years and years and years. So I feel if you were to be taught about every vulnerable group, you would never leave med school. It's constantly.
What amount is the most important? How much is enough, right? If I told you a 1 hour lecture, that it wouldn't feel like enough, right? Because this experience is so visceral for you. You've everyone whose care experience has been through so much. You'd feel one lecture is not enough, a whole day, a whole week. That will never feel like enough. But what I say to that is, I think all of our patients, whatever has happened in their past, whatever healthcare they have received or not received, they are their own individual person. And that what I think is really important for our doctors and our medical students to learn is that we need to see our patients as more than just a list of symptoms, that we have to approach our patients with a level of humanity, that, you're a human, I'm a human, there's been experiences in the past that you faced and I faced, and we both bring that humanity to that consultation, because you're a human who's experienced things, and that may have had an effect on why you're here to see me today, that kind of thing. And that empathy and curiosity to figure out what's actually going on and dig below the surface and figure out, what's actually happening with you. I think that's the most important thing.
In your mahi as yourself, or in general as a doctor, at what point do you know that a young person or a child is currently in care?
So it's quite variable. So in some cases on our clinical records, there'll be a clinical alert that, potentially some child protection stuff, and it might be in the system that there's been, an MDT, multidisciplinary team sort of document about the child. Often this will be, perhaps before a child has been brought into care, or maybe they're still in care but with their biological parents, that sort of thing. There's all sorts of different ways that children can be in care. Sometimes we've got a caregiver who has, I don't know the different words, but as in the child is with their care, and the caregivers will say, I'm the caregiver, not the biological parent, or something like that. Or sometimes when we ask, because we're often asking the parent or the caregiver, is there any family history of da-da-da-da-da? And then at that point, often people will be like, so-and-so is adopted, or so-and-so is, under care, and blah, blah, blah. And It's variable whether that caregiver may or may not know the history.
Yeah, okay. So we heard Lisa talk previously about the gap in her, like having 2 NHI numbers, which blew me away, like crazy. But also a little bit of a miscommunication between health and oranga tamariki, it seems. So like, and I know that's an ongoing issue. What do you see the solutions on like making a better communication between healthcare providers and social workers or oranga tamariki?
Yeah, that's a good question. From my point of view in a paediatric emergency department, it's really difficult. We don't have a lot of power or ability to change things there. I would say in interacting with oranga tamariki, it's quite variable because oftentimes things happen after hours, and after hours oranga tamariki are pretty light in terms of their resources. What I would say for to improve that relationship between healthcare and oranga tamariki, I think it really has to start in primary care. I think especially for young people in care, it's that continuity of care. It's important, right? Like if they're not going to get the continuity of care from caregivers, they need to get it from oranga tamariki, and they need to get it from the healthcare. And it's really tricky if oranga tamariki have been changing the location of the child from place to place in terms of caregivers to caregivers. Because like we brought up before about the different locations for the GP, because that's really challenging. Because what people don't really understand as well, in general, information sharing between primary care and hospital care is already a bit tenuous. And so when you're shifting from GP to GP, like that record like kind of almost physically stays with that clinic. So if you go to one GP who you're enrolled at and then you get taken to another GP that you're not enrolled at, there's a whole process, there's a delay. They will eventually get your information, but sometimes it takes a little while, a few business days, etc., etc. So that's the tricky part, is if we don't ensure that a child is, staying at least within a geographical area, then it becomes really difficult to maintain that continuity of care. And what I'm also concerned about is that in general, we're not really investing much. We're not investing enough in primary care. So in general, we're seeing that loss of continuity of care for people in general, and that's going to affect kids in care even more.
Yeah, like I'm quite grown up. I've left care many years ago, but I think a year and a half ago, my GP left, like she moved, and I've just been devastated. Yeah. And I'd had my GP, she was my first GP I've actually ever had, because I didn't get healthcare when I was in care. But even to this day, I now hate going to the doctor because I don't see Dr. Ashman anymore. Shout out Dr. Ashman. But I can only imagine how much harder it is.
There's a trust element, right?
Because you're vulnerable to a doctor. You are supposed to tell them like what's wrong with you, and that's quite difficult. And sometimes they have to touch you to like hear your heartbeat. And for a lot of young people, myself included, like that trust was really hard earned by Dr. Ashman. And now I have to go see strangers, and I can only imagine how hard it is to be a young person and having those issues, and then constantly moving. And like Lisa said, she didn't want to tell anyone what was wrong because of that. If there are young people who are listening who maybe have that issue with like being scared of going to the doctor, or even to have issues accessing healthcare, like what would you say to them?
I would say that there are people out there who want to look after you and want to advocate for you. I'm certain that there are people out there. I know that sometimes it can be really difficult and really challenging. You might need a second opinion. Not every GP is everyone's cup of tea, and that's fine. We're a diverse group of people, just like our patients are a really diverse group of people. And that's what I would say. And also what I really want to hammer home is the things that have happened to you guys in care, whether it was before you've been put into care or whether the things that have happened to you in care, these are things that happen to you, but it is not you. It is not who you are. And that, you have the ability, I know it's tricky because you don't have heaps of control over how things are happening while you're in care before you're an adult. But one day you do get the ability to make those decisions for yourself, and that there is hope that there is hope. Things can get better. It's not your destiny. Okay, I know that there are many things that can impact your mental health, your physical health. Hearing Lisa's story about her own biological mother's difficulty just being pregnant with her and her twin brother. I know that the studies show that having that stress while being pregnant can have effects on the offspring, the children, right, in terms of their overall health. But they're not your destiny at the same time. There's so much that you can do, that you can change those statistics. Don't let yourself be a statistic. You have agency and you can change your destiny. And that's what I want people to feel as well, is that things are hard, but you have the power and you have the agency, and there are people who want to help you.
If anything in this podcast has raised any issues for you and you need to talk, we recommend reaching out to a trusted friend or adult. Or you can call Youthline on 0800 376 633 to get more support. Or if you're in crisis, please call 111. Remember, there is no shame in asking for help. Next week on Whakarongo, we talk to another care experience rangatahi, Alia Davies, about the promise of education and access to her goals and dreams. And don't forget to subscribe to the podcast on YouTube, Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. And be a part of a movement that advocates for change, one story at a time.